First of all, a garden, it's not. It's a train station, really. One flight up and you're on the fabled parquet floor. Now, before you get all misty-eyed about the parquet, take a closer look.
Bleep you. This is our way.
Yes, loud.
Stevens is pretty smart and knows what he's doing.
That 3-and-D roll. Oh, it's the D-League.
If I had Antoine Walker's body, I'd be an all-star.
Welcome, everybody, back to the Banners broadcast. I hope you know what this is by now. If you don't, it's the official podcast of CelticsBlog.com. We come to you every single week with our writers, our stories, and just checking in on the season. What's going on? Today, we're going to try something new. Questions from our staff provided fresh, hot for us to answer after not a stunning loss to the Detroit Pistons, but definitely a wake-up call for a team that for weeks now has been winning and winning and winning, still holds the best record in the NBA. But as I've seen, as others have seen, and as Brad Stevens has said again and again and again, the product isn't as good as the win-loss record is right now. So we're going to break through all of that today. I'm not going to do it alone. Andrew Doxy is with me today. What up, Andrew?
Hey, man, it's all good. Ready to pod it out.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. So the first question I have for you, because I know how I feel about this, is what do you think of that Pistons loss? What does it say to you? I don't want to overreact to one loss, but I think for one loss, this one said a lot.
You know, it's funny. I thought you were going to ask me about Marcus Smart because you started with, like, you know how I feel about this. I was like, oh, man, right off the bat. But in terms of the Pistons loss, I think Ryan Bernardoni, he's the editor of Celtics Hub.
Yep.
He tweeted out something last night that, I thought it was probably the best tweet of the night, is that, sometimes when two good teams face each other, your team is going to lose. And, that's all that happened last night, in my opinion. I think that, some of the warning signs that we've seen early in the season played out last night.
Yeah.
But overall, we're not going to win every game. And I would rather lose to good teams on occasion than for us to, have a random loss against the Nets or against the Lakers or something like that. So, I'm not really too upset about it. And even as poorly as we played, we still had a chance with, a minute and a half left. So I'm totally fine with that.
And this season's funny now because we were in a space early on where there were no expectations. And I saw a funny tweet about this too. There was that meme with we won, but at what cost? And it's like, now that we've got this win streak, the expectations are back. So when we start losing,
we're going to the finals now. Obviously,
it's going to be a mess again. And I've kind of fallen for that a little bit myself, I'll admit.
Yeah.
But you do have to readjust your expectations just a little bit based on what you see early this season. And this does look like a team that can probably get back to where they were last year, Eastern Conference Finals. I know the East is a little tougher this year, probably. The defense, I'm not going to complain about a team bent on defense, but how legitimately do you feel this defensive run has been?
There's going to be nights where nothing works, and I feel like that was what yesterday. I mean, obviously, the only thing working was Marcus Smart's jumper, which is
of course.
When that's working, that's by default nothing else works. That's just how the law of averages works out. But I think this defensive surge that we've had is something that can more or less be sustained. They might not stay number one the whole season, but they're definitely going to be a top 5 defensive team by the end of the year, just because Danny Ainge built this team so perfectly in terms of how he designed, like not just the players, but like the types of players that he went after. Like, players like Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, Marcus Smart, guys with long wingspans, and Al Horford in the paint. Aaron Baines is like a concrete wall. These kind of components that he's put together, they're going to be a solid defensive team, especially with great coaching that they have in Brad Stevens. So I think that just the personnel that we have and their physical attributes is good enough, notwithstanding their actual defensive IQ, which for a team this young is pretty high.
And you mentioned Jason Tatum. I still think this is so amazing. Even after last night, he sits with a 118 offensive rating, 100 defensive rating. So he has just been insane to start this year. Still shooting 50% from the field. Still shooting just a hair under 50% from three with 5 attempts per game. So he's been a force for them. He's going to continue to be, I feel like. I still think defensively they can be consistent, even with that breakdown last night. Detroit scares me a little bit because they seem to have the tools to dismantle this team. They really take advantage of the defense with how powerful they are inside. I mean, Drummond just looks like a different guy, but we'll get to that in a little. Taking away Boston's rebounding advantage, which has been strong this year. You know, they have the offense to battle with them as well. And, you know, we know very well what Avery Bradley's capable of against Kyrie. A shooting percentage issue the Celtics have just gets further, you know, impacted by that. The fact that Irving's probably not going to be very efficient going against him. Before we go into these questions that I'm just dying to read because they're great ones from our staff today, I want to tell you about DraftKings. Why not try out Jason Tatum in DraftKings? It's hoop season. We're right in the swing of it. And now your favorite hardwood heroes have returned to action. We know that by now. It's time for you to put your fantasy knowledge to the test to win huge cash prizes. Every night you can play one-day fantasy basketball at DraftKings.com. And I've played plenty of daily fantasy sports at this point. Yeah, it's a fun thing for me to do. I've just been trying them out, comparing them to each other at this point. And, you know, there's just so many different ways at DraftKings to play that I've noticed myself personally. You get public contests with the huge cash prizes you hear about all the time. And they're legit. These are some big, big pots you're battling for night in and night out. But you also get your beginner casual courses where you're going to play against people who are just getting started, if that's your thing. And you can pretty much draft a new team each day. Paul Millsap on your team last week. He's out now. Don't have to worry about that like you do in your full-time fantasy basketball leagues. Just ask Dan from St. Louis or Jeremy from Austin. They both turned a $3 entry into $1,000 each. So huge cash prizes and bragging rights await only at DraftKings. Use code CLNS at DraftKings.com to play free with your first deposit for your share of $10,000 in total prizes tonight. Don't wait. Use code CLNS at DraftKings.com now to choose your lineup, and you can seriously win cash tonight. CLNS, DraftKings.com, the game inside the game. Minimum $5 deposit required. Eligibility restrictions apply. See DraftKings.com for details. Let's get to it, Andrew. First question is from our buddy Matt Chin, who you hear quite a bit on this program. Celtics at 22nd in bench points. Do you see that as a concern going forward? And do you think the Celtics have to address it using the DPE or just making a trade some other way?
So I actually don't see the bench as much of a problem as the starting lineup because hot take alert. We've gotten into these holes against good teams and even bad teams early on in the game. First quarter has been a nightmare for a lot of our games, where we just get into these holes and the second unit will come in, and oftentimes that unit will also struggle until some of the starters kind of start staggering back into the lineup. And I feel like if we, this is another hot take, and I'm actually writing about this, but changing the starting lineup might be the biggest way we can help the bench. What I've noticed is that, everybody likes to say, Tatum should just take over. Tatum should get the ball every possession, but Tatum doesn't want the ball every possession. If you look at when, in those all bench lineups, except for Tatum, he's always deferring. Like, there was one play where he had a clear mismatch, and then he had Marcus Morris in the corner. He was on the wing. Marcus Morris was in the corner. Even though he had a clear mismatch, he still passed it up. Even though he was already in post-up position and everything, he still passed it up to Marcus Morris for some reason. And I guess, he's still 19. Like, he has these great flashes where we're like, wow, he's only 19. But we also have to remember, like, he's still 19. So I don't think he's ready to take over the bench. So I think that the best thing that Brad could do, in my humble opinion, would be to stagger the lineups a bit more, because I don't think that we're at a point yet where we can roll out an all-bench unit. And that'll kind of help the other guys, because if you have a guy like Kyrie playing with 4 bench guys, all the offensive attention is going to be on Kyrie. It'll open up the floor a little bit for guys like Rozier and Daniel Tice, and we kind of saw a little bit of that last night. So
I was at the Magic game on Friday night, and if you were watching that game there or at home, you could just see how inept the bench is on its own. And that's where staggering comes into play, like you talk about, because Stevens sent out the whole entire bench with a 30-point lead, and they lost about half of it before the end of the game. It was a disaster against a Magic team that is proven to be not that good to start this year. I generally agree with what you're saying. I think we're due for a lineup shakeup right now, and I don't think it's going to come just because even Stevens, as good as he is, as outside the box of a thinker as he is, probably isn't going to shake things up while they're winning. That's just so far unconventional that you just won't see it. But, I do think there's a case to be made to maybe get Smart in there. Maybe.
You are talking my language. Yeah. You are talking my language. I didn't want to say it, but I am ready to talk about it for 2 hours.
The only reason I say this, I'm going to throw it way back to the summer when I wanted Smart to be a starter going into this year, is because I feel like there's a greater level of focus to his game. I think there's a greater level of discipline to his game when he's playing amongst the starters. You see that with Jaylen Brown, too. There's just sort of a starter effect, I feel like, on this team where it's just not as loosey-goosey and let it fly, which you're seeing with him, Terry Rozier, who's actually hitting shots. But to mention Rozier, he's playing fantastic this year. Maybe not brutally consistent, but consistent enough where you say, all right, this guy might just give you 10-plus almost every single night. And that's where he's at right now this season, 10 points a game. I feel very good about him being the bench scorer and maybe even the bench facilitator, because we've seen Stevens put the ball in his hands more and more to start this year. Maybe he can't do it alone. I still think you have to stagger facilitators a little bit, like you talked about. But, Rozier gives me confidence that Smart can move outside of that starting lineup, and I don't know who he'll start for. I see people mentioning, Smart's the real power forward, not Marcus Smart.
It's also true.
What do you think that starting lineup change is if we're going to leave the bench to these guys? And is Rozier that scorer, or do they need another guy in that capacity?
Yeah, so we joke about it, but I absolutely do believe that Smart should plug in for Marcus Morris in those games. I mean, there are obviously going to be the rare occasions where we need to start Baines and Horford, but that hasn't happened too often so far, and I don't think that it's going to happen extremely often moving forward. But for the most part, it should. I am a very strong proponent of starting Marcus Smart as not as the power forward. You would, semantics-wise, it would be Tatum sliding over. But Smart does so many things that you would file under the big man category. And not only does this help the team, but Marcus Smart, it plays so much. I mean, everybody plays better with the starters, but Smart plays infinitely better with the starters. His true shooting percentage is terrible on the season, but when he plays in that 5-man lineup with Irving, Tatum, Horford, and Brown, his true shooting percentage shoots up to 70.5%. His effective field goal percentage on the season is 42%, but when he's with those starters, he shoots 71.4%.
There we go, numbers.
Here we are. Hey, listen, it's facts only.
Smart's been a just wildly intriguing case to start this year. Overall, he's been a net plus, but the shooting's as bad as it's ever been.
Worst,
and and we thought it was soft preseason. Of course, we're seeing the worst of the worst to start this year. I saw a tweet that he would have to hit 55 straight shots or something like that just to get to league average at 45%. And, of course, even after that Detroit game where he just put together his most rock-solid performance of the year, of course, and a loss, which you don't expect. We still have a ton of questions about Smart, and they all seem to kind of lead to the offseason where they have to make a decision on him. And, of course, Greg Casoli asks, does this streak of shooting, if it continues for the rest of the season, place a limit on how much you're willing to pay to keep him this summer? Any more differently than you would have said going in?
No, not at all. You're talking to the chief Marcus Smart stand, so I don't know if that's really a fair question. If Smart shot the percentages that he shot last year while continuing to improve offense, because there has to be a clear distinction, especially when you're talking about Marcus Smart and players of his sort, is that there's a difference between being a bad shooter and a bad offensive player. So Smart is a terrible shooter. but he's a fantastic offensive player for the other things that he does. He's a great pick and roll facilitator. He's a great pick and roll. He's a good pick setter. He boxes out on the offensive end. He gets offensive rebounds, all kinds of things. So if Marcus Smart made the offensive progress that he's made this season while shooting last season's percentages, I'd be extremely happy, and he'd probably be averaging like 12, 4, and 5.5, something like that. So, that's just my projection.
Yeah.
And there's an uptick in his assists per game this year too, which is really good because now we have about 3 players averaging 5 assists per game, which is good. For me personally, it wouldn't change how much I would offer, but in a sense, I'm glad that Smart is shooting this poorly while not costing the team wins, just because his market value will kind of decrease a little bit. This sounds terrible because I want my guy to prosper, but the more affordable we can have Marcus Smart, the better it is for the team moving forward, especially as we might have 2 potential max contracts coming in with Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum down the line. Him kind of not shooting lights out like he expected plays better for the Celtics moving forward. And I don't think Marcus and his agent, because it sounded like they were being pretty reasonable during the whole process. Mm-hmm. So I don't think that they're going to be stubborn enough to say, well, hey, even though I shot this percent, I still deserve this amount of money.
I get the sense that the agent evaluations of these players are still higher than the teams look at it, as we've seen the cap flatten out a little bit. And I think this summer will really be the reckoning of that. And we've talked so much about Smart that I feel like in the end it's just going to all be for nothing when his market isn't strong and they get him back on a bargain, which is probably what they're looking for, probably why they didn't extend him this season. And your point's spot on. I think the shooting's going to scare some people away. I think there are some teams out there that just love him regardless and value what he brings to the table. But when it comes to the Celtics and how they value him, I do think there needs to be a limit. And we'll see what that limit is. It's up for them to decide and what they're looking to do long term. They are capped out right now pretty much, but they might be looking down the line at what they could do in a few years, whatever that is, just maintaining that flexibility. But there is a limit here somewhere. Like, we all love Smart. I'd love to see him here no matter what. They're better with him than they are without him, clearly. Mm-hmm. And, it's just such a hard evaluation. I've never seen an evaluation so hard money-wise because the guy is just an anomaly. The way he plays, the impact he has while just not filling up the stat sheet, just the demeanor he puts on everyone around him, like the intensity he plays the game with just always seems to be so contagious. So there's so much Smart bashing, but sometimes you just have to appreciate him for what he is, and he has helped the team more than he's hurt him, even for the shooting woes. So I'll lean towards your side. But even as a Smart
welcome to the dark side.
Even as a Smart lover myself, I do have some pause at just saying bring him back no matter what. Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum. Mike DePrisco is asking who you would rather have for the next 5 years.
Tatum. No hesitation.
It's funny because I'm the biggest Tatum guy going, and even I still kind of say, Brown has the higher ceiling. I've heard some people say there's Kawhi traits in him, and I don't think, as absurd as it sounds, I don't think it's outside the realm of possibility that that's the kind of jump we could see from this guy.
Yeah, I honestly, I'm pretty high on both of them. If I have to pick, though, I would pick Tatum, but I definitely agree with you in that it would not surprise me in the slightest to see Jaylen Brown make a jump to stardom, because he's already jumped 10 points per game just in one offseason, and he still can't dribble. So imagine after a couple of off seasons, of training, if once he adds handles and he stops making silly mistakes like getting lost off ball. He has serious potential, but I would have to lean towards Tatum. Tatum's more polished, and he still has so much more room to grow. My biggest concern going into the season was defense, and he's been remarkably capable on defense so far, with room to grow. And he's already just a guy who looks like a 20 points per game scorer at least, and there's room to grow. And he's only 19, so that's who I would pick moving forward. But I would not complain if I was stuck with Jaylen Brown at all.
It's very hard to pick between them because they just complement each other so well, and we're seeing that this year. They need Tatum's polished game just to impact them on any single lineup they put out there because he can just do everything so well already. And Brown's still that case. He's just one piece away from being what he can be, and you never ever know if he's going to develop that dribble move. I still look years from now, if we're looking back and saying, man, what if he developed that dribble move? It's going to be frustrating.
Oh, yeah.
It's going to be.
I mean, even if we got this Jaylen Brown for the rest of his career, he's a starter right now. So, I mean, but I am definitely confident that he'll make another jump. Maybe not to superstardom because, it's incredibly difficult to make that jump to superstardom, but he'll be a star. He'll make a couple of all-star teams at least. That's like his floor, in my opinion.
Yeah, and it kills me to take the other side because I am just such a big Tatum guy. I wonder what his ceiling is still because there's a lot of little areas where he can improve, I feel like, but I just wonder, how the brute force scoring is going to come about. We still haven't seen him have that 30-point game, that massive scoring night that he's capable of, and that's just probably him playing within the flow of things so far. You talked about that a little bit earlier in the program. There is kind of that adjustment period for him, I feel like, still. And, we'll just see where this goes. I'm so excited to see where both these guys end the year at. Maybe they'll even both end up on the All-Star team. We'll see. Probably Brown.
You never know.
Probably Brown more likely than Tatum this year, but we'll see. Last question we got today. Will the offense get better? Bill Sy. Nice and simple. Good way to end this chat before we get on to our Pistons conversation with Duncan Smith today. Is it going to get any better? Do you feel like you've seen improvement lately?
Yes and no. Yes, because eventually I feel like Brad will go to a lineup change for the starters. We're winning games by defense. Just straight up, the only reason we're coming back from these large deficits is because we're getting defensive stops. So, but those initial holes that we're getting into is because none of our shots are falling. I think that once we get into a place where we can change the lineup a little bit and get some different looks, then our offense might look a little crisper because, like I was saying earlier, the numbers in that five-man unit, our closing five with Brown, Horford, Tatum, Irving, and Smart, the offensive numbers on that are really good. So I just think that it comes down to playing the better combination of players more. It's weird because every season this happens where Brad takes like the first half of the season to find out what rotation he likes better. Mm-hmm. And which is kind of frustrating to me because like it's pretty apparent after 10 games. But at the same time, I don't think that we have the personnel where we're just going to be an offensive juggernaut. I don't feel that we're going to end the season in the top 10 in offensive rating or top 10 in most offensive stats. But I do see a consistent defensive presence at the top of the league, so that'll keep us, up there in terms of wins. But I don't think the offense is going to continue to be as bad as we've seen. I think it'll just be middle of the road for the rest of the season, around 15 in terms of offensive rank in the league.
Yeah, and we've seen them get up to that point in the last few nights. They're to that middle point of the league right there with the Bucks in terms of offensive rating.
Good company.
Half at first, yeah. I don't know what's going on with the Bucks right now anyway.
Yeah, it's weird.
That's a different story. Assists. I thought there was a lack of assists to start this year, but they're back into the top 10 in assist percentage. Assist to turnover, the top 10 too. So look at these analytics. Even offensive rebounding percentage, they're in the upper half of the league. A lot of the analytics look pretty good so far, but it's just that shooting percentage. Bottom half of the league, true shooting percentage. The shooting slashes have not been good for this team. Across the board, they're not shooting very efficiently unless you say Horford, Tatum, Irving to a greater degree recently. But below that, it's just inefficiency, and it comes from the bench. It comes from Jaylen Brown and his consistency issues, which we still deal with here. And even Marcus Morris, who had...
Don't get me started.
I'm going to talk about him with Duncan Smith in the other half of the show, but I saw him play for the first time when he came back from that knee injury, and I was just like, what the heck's this guy doing? Just with the shot selection, with how hard the shots he was taking are, where he's taking them in between, just running around these screens and jumping up. Mm-hmm. He doesn't look like he's going to help this efficiency issue they have, especially with the amount of shots he's taking.
Yeah.
And I think he's hugely problematic for the rest of this year. He's been hitting them so far, but we're seeing less and less of it lately.
And that's one thing that, everything goes back to Marcus Smart for me. But, that aside, everything with Marcus Smart, because people complain about his shooting a lot, but he's often put in positions where he has to take the shot. So he'll get the ball end of shot clock, or he'll be wide open. Those are the kind of shots that you want players to take, even though Smart's not a good shooter. Like, you can't pass that up because you're only making the offense worse if you're hesitating in those situations. Marcus Morris straight up just shoots the ball whenever he wants.
Yeah.
Like, it does not matter if the ball's in the middle of flowing. If he sees a sliver of an opportunity, he's taking it. And that's what bothers me about that's what, let me correct myself. That's what infuriates me about watching Marcus Morris play basketball, is that he just thinks that he's like Prime Melo if Prime Melo wasn't a good basketball player.
There's just no hesitation, and he's good. He's good at it to a degree. I feel like he's probably has a higher percentage than most people would taking the shots he takes. It's just ugly to watch between him and Smart just going back and forth with these weird attempts they both have, and it's just... I've laughed enough times at the fact that their name is both Marcus, but it's just uncanny. Like, the way these guys both approach the game. It's tough. And, luckily Irving has just been on an absolute tear lately, and he's covered up a lot of the offensive issues they have, attacking, facilitating, finding that balance between the two areas of his game that have just looked to be amazing to start this year. And he's over 30 points per game over the last 5 or 6 nights, so he's finally getting back to where he is as just a ruthless scorer. But I just wonder if he can do it alone. And, I hate to go back to it again and again, but we're going to say it all year. Hayward was that efficient volume guy who they really needed to just hold this offense to enough of a high level where it probably balance out with this defense and being a great, great team. But we can't worry about that till a later day, I guess. Are you still holding out hope that he comes back?
According to the diagnosis that the team doctors gave in the press release and, unofficial Twitter doctors and everything, it looks like an injury that should be healed by March, April. So I don't know if we're still in the playoffs. I mean, if we're starting the playoffs and he's like 100% good to go, I don't see why he can't kind of just jump in a little bit. Or at the end of the season, like Paul George did that one year, just get, a couple of games, 20 minutes a game.
No, that would be cool. That would be cool. Maybe get in a game or two before the playoffs start and then shut it down. Like, it'd be kind of weird to do that, but that would be some cool momentum going into the postseason if he played in the last game at the Garden or something like that.
Yeah, and also just to give the guys rest, like you could rest Tatum and play, Hayward, just to get him some cool, moments. Because I feel like maybe the reason he ruled himself out for the entire season is the mental aspect. Because after a devastating injury like that, I can definitely understand why he would be terrified to get on the court. So maybe he's ruling himself out for the season just because he doesn't want to rush the mental aspect of it. I don't really think that he should be ruled out the whole year, but I totally understand that's what he wants and that's the time that he needs. Then it's cool with me.
Or maybe he heard that they'd get $8 million in cap if he said
that's also true. Maybe he's just looking out for Danny Ainge.
Alrighty, that's Andrew Doxy, who we always enjoy very well. As he said, he's got an article coming, so check that out on CelticsBlog.com. Always good to hear from you, Doxy. We will hear from Duncan Smith next. Let's see if those Pistons are legit, because we're talking Eastern Conference contenders right now. Can the Celtics get back to the East Finals with this team working? Let's learn a little bit more about them and check in on our old friend Avery Bradley on the other side. This is the Banners broadcast. What is up, everybody? Back here from our break. Told you he'd be with us earlier, and here he is now, Duncan Smith. It's not often we go behind enemy lines on the Banners broadcast, but new show. In our young days here, we're trying to develop it a little bit, so why not try something new? We're going over the other side, and I don't think there's a better team we could have done it on than these Pistons, because they are on a roll right now. As Duncan pointed out on Twitter, they've beaten the Warriors, Clippers, and now the Celtics on the road. So some real impressive opponents have gone down at the hand of the Pistons this year, and they now sit second in the East, just games behind the Celtics, 13-6, off of a big win over the Celtics as we record this, 118-108. Of note, because Celtics defense has been stingy all this year. We've been talking about it over and over again. I did a little research into the Pistons pregame, and it's crazy how this team has just turned it around from day to night, year to year. I really cannot in recent memory think of a team that has just gone from so firmly entrenched in the middle of the league one year to one of the better ones the next year without a whole lot of change. We all know Avery Bradley made the move from Boston to Detroit, which makes us even more interesting. Marcus Morris joining our side. So let's get into it. As I said, Duncan Smith with us, Pistons powered, B-Ball Breakdown contributor. A lot of great contributors over there at B-Ball Breakdown, and he is one of them, and he is here to tell us what the heck happened. Where did this Pistons team come from?
Well, what's going on, Bobby? It's an interesting night of Pistons basketball, to say the least. That's a pretty common question that I've been asked, is like, where exactly did this team
I'm sure you're a busy man nationally this year.
There have been a few Q&As. I think a lot of what this team is displaying right now is a result of Stan Van Gundy's patience from last year to this year. We didn't really get a chance to see what this young core looked like after the Pistons traded for Tobias Harris 2 seasons ago. Reggie Jackson came down with knee tendonitis last season, and they really never got anything going. 2 years ago, Reggie was probably the best player on the team. Last season, he was one of the worst players in the NBA.
Yeah,
that's not hyperbolic whatsoever. Like, he was impact-wise probably the most detrimental high-usage player in the league. And this year, all he really needed to do, I think, is just to be like even a neutral or a small plus. But tonight, I think he played a virtually perfect game. For example, and he's demonstrated an ability to be not necessarily a game manager, but to sort of like be a distributor first. He can be at his most effective when he's got like tonight, 10 field goal attempts. Van Gundy kept the core together. He built in depth. Like, tonight was one of the few times that actually the Pistons bench hasn't been a difference. Usually the Pistons starters play to a small deficit overall, and then the bench just comes in and overwhelms. There's a lot of depth on this team. This team is built to shoot now. In years past, there was really no shooting to speak of. Last year, Reggie Bullock led the team in three-point shooting at like 38%. And then after that, it was Reggie Jackson at 36%. And he did like basically nothing else well last year. And then after that, you have a whole bunch of like 32, 33, 34% shooters last season. And this year, I haven't looked at the updated numbers after this game, but they've got like 3 or 4 guys shooting like near or over 40%. Tobias Harris is shooting almost 50% from 3. Pretty much every transaction the Pistons made this summer was to add shooting. And they're a top 5 3-point shooting team this season. And like that alone is a big difference. Andre Drummond is a completely different player, unrecognizable, I think, to a lot of people.
Oh, yeah.
I saw some stats earlier. He had like the best game by a visitor in Boston since like 1977 or something. Andre Drummond is a brand new guy, man. Like 2020 games aren't exactly a frequent thing necessarily, but it's not that surprising to see him put up like 15 and then like throw 5 assists and 4 steals in. He's impactful in ways other than just rebounding now. Him and Avery Bradley have developed a really close synergy in like dribble handoffs.
And that surprised me.
A lot of that.
That surprised me a lot because if there's one thing we were stunned to see here as Boston people was Avery Bradley facilitating on offense like that, and the little 1-2-man game they had going on back and forth in between was impressive. And to hit on Drummond, the guy's blowing my mind because if you asked me this time last year who the most overrated player in the league was, I'd say Drummond in a second. And, of course, we learned a lot about the procedure he had done over the summer. I was shocked to hear that he'd been playing with that left nostril pretty much closed back to his UConn days. It blows my mind that that's how long we've been talking about him struggling with that now. And that plays into sleep. That plays into, your ability to play a full game. He went 40 minutes tonight, 10-12, 26 points, 22 rebounds. 6 assists, so you pretty much hit on all the points there. 4 steals, including the big one against Horford down the stretch. So it's not really a big exaggeration to say he took over this game tonight and really just poured it on one of the better defenses in basketball. He always knew he's been a great rebounder, and he pretty much took over a game against the number one rebounding team in basketball. So he pretty much blew away a team that's the number one team in basketball right now, but a team that had been doing really well in two areas that he just blew up tonight. So on Drummond, so many things to talk about. We could probably do a full show about his transformation from last year to this year. But two key points is the free throws, 6 of 8 from the line tonight, which is day and night from being the worst in the league. So that's a point. And then, of course, just his overall game, losing 30 pounds, the agility. I've never really seen a guy just put in so much work over one summer and just transform like he has. I mean, what has impressed you most about him this year?
Oh, it's hard to trim it down to just one thing. The free throws, he's down to 62% from the free throw line. He was really close to the mid 70s for a long time.
Yeah, that's probably the last time I looked.
yeah. There's nothing wrong with that. I've always maintained that if he was just a little bit shy of 50%, I did some math work and some detailed stuff that I figured anything 50% or higher is basically we can consider that to be a positive, considering the other things that he brings.
As long as you can keep him on the court.
Yeah, exactly. But so the free throw shooting is great. I kind of see that as just a bonus, really. The fact that the Pistons run offense through him is remarkable. It's not even just the dribble handoffs. He's developed an ability to. He's got really good court vision. It's something we saw in the past, but in small doses. But he's got really good court vision. He can find guys off cuts. He can see things before they're developing, basically. So the offense doesn't just subsist completely on 1-5 pick and rolls with him and Reggie Jackson. You've got a completely different twist facilitating through other players, and that's been a really big difference. One thing that I think more than anything we've seen this year is that oxygen is really important.
Yeah.
Not only day-to-day life, but when you're a high-performance professional athlete, all the more so. It affects training. He dropped 30 pounds, like you mentioned, earlier in 2 months.
And we talked, and I hit on real quick about the fact that that's been a problem with him going back to UConn. Why do you think he waited so long to address that?
Nobody really realized that there was a problem. Basically, his allergies flared up really bad this past season. So, if it seemed like his energy was really low late in games in particular, if it seemed like he was really lethargic, if his body language was poor, a lot of people chalk that up to just a malcontent, lazy player. And it turns out that he just couldn't breathe.
I mean,
it turns out that when a professional athlete who seems to have an attitude problem that doesn't really kind of jibe with the his personality and various traits, maybe there's something else at play.
Yeah.
And his allergies really flared up to the point where they realized there has to be an actual real problem. And sure enough, they checked into it, and his septum was deviated, and so they repaired it early in the offseason, April, I think, after the Pistons were eliminated. Mathematically eliminated. They did not make the playoffs, sadly. So it took care of that. And then, right off the bat, basically, he got to work. He started slimming up almost immediately, and I think a lot of that came from additional energy that he had just to train. A big issue last year with him was playing the second night of back-to-backs on the road. A lot of that, I think, came from inflammation due to just traveling, flying, and so he rarely played well on those road back-to-backs. Mm-hmm. And this year, he played 40 minutes, I think, against the Warriors on the second half of a back-to-back. He's put in heavy minutes in just about every back-to-back game so far and played really well. You would never see him just dominate for 40 minutes last year.
And he did tonight.
He just didn't have the physical capacity because the guy couldn't get oxygen to his brain and into his body. And here we see, he had energy for a full game, and I think he was probably better in the fourth than he was at any point in the game, and it was by a pretty significant margin. For Drummond's sake alone, this is a game the Pistons never would have won last year.
Yeah, and you're looking at a tight race across the East when it comes to most improved candidates. He's right up there among them, of course, and it just blows my mind. I mean, we're sitting here laughing about the fact that it's, just oxygen, but for a team that was just stuck in the middle of the league, that little miracle that they found out with the allergies probably changed the fortunes of this team's outlook for years to come, which just blows my mind. And the fact that they're right up there with the best teams in the NBA early this season really it has completely caught me and I'm sure everybody else off guard, because last year this team was a dumpster fire, or very close to it, I feel like, it was looking from the outside. And, it was 37-45, not the worst record you could have, but the expectations they had, at least to be a playoff team, versus where they ended up with Reggie Jackson, who, like you said in the opener, maybe the worst player in the NBA last year, and that's supposed to be your core guy at point guard for years to come. And then, Drummond, decent season, putting up rebounds, but just not a game changer. And when you're paying him over $20 million a year, you're expecting him to be a game changer in that regard. So tough cap situation, things just not clicking. Offense wasn't great last year. What was the feeling coming out of last year? I almost saw them coming out of last year and saw Doc Rivers lose his managerial power with the Clippers, and Stan Van Gundy in that similar spot in Detroit. I almost felt like Stan Van Gundy was in trouble there. Was there riots in the streets of Detroit, calling for this guy's job, or what was the feeling like among the fan base?
I think that we kept the fan base fairly calm about asking for Stan Van Gundy's job. He hasn't, with the exception of overpaying for some guy, you would love to have John Lure's money back, for example. You'd love to have Boban's money back, or at least to have gotten them at a discount, rather than a huge premium was paid for both of them unnecessarily. The moves that he's made, with a few exceptions here and there, the moves that Van Gundy's made as executive have largely been fairly decent. Maybe not across the board perfect or anything like that, but when you look at his trade record, for example, he fleeces trade partners.
The Orlando trade, I will still say probably for the rest of this decade was the fleece of the decade. You traded two role players, and I mean role players, bench guys, for a guy who's probably going to be part of your core for years to come in Tobias Harris.
Yeah, and the guy's 25 years old. He's still 25 years old.
Makes no sense.
yeah. Van Gundy, without a doubt, I would say he even won a trade with Danny Ainge, and that doesn't happen. Nobody wins.
We'll see on that one.
Well, we'll see on that one. But I mean, Avery Bradley for Marcus Morris. Just from the Pistons' perspective, it was a talent upgrade without a doubt. It allowed Gordon Hayward to come to Boston, which is a big win for you guys. Certainly down the road.
And it also, I'll throw in there, allowed us to keep Terry Rozier as well, which is the sneaky part of that deal, because he's been good to start this year, despite all the jokes on Twitter about him and Ainge.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And so, it definitely helps Boston, but at the same time, it was a talent upgrade for the Pistons, while being able to, sidestep the whole KCP situation. So there's that. There's also the fact that, we wanted to see what would happen with a healthy Reggie Jackson. We wanted to see what would happen with an Andre Drummond who could breathe. The primary sentiment, I think, was a wait-and-see kind of situation. We wanted to see what Van Gundy could do with a healthy core, and I think that that was kind of his goal all along, was just to see what this core could do healthy, and try your darndest, basically, as long as possible to avoid having to blow things up and start over. And if you can just be competitive now with the core you have, maybe you're not championship material, but any given year, 4 teams might be championship material. That doesn't mean that there's no value in playing it out and entertaining your fans. I think that waiting it out, seeing what would happen, was Van Gundy's plan with this core, and I think that was kind of reciprocally the opinion of the fan base as well, to just kind of wait it out, see what would happen with Van Gundy and a healthy team.
So a lot of people probably confused. We're doing a Pistons segment here on the Banners broadcast, and I'll tell you all again to subscribe to the Banners broadcast on iTunes if you'd be so kind. Avery Bradley came back tonight to Boston, and one thing we Celtics people get crap for all the time is being overly sentimental about guys who maybe weren't quite legends in Boston. And you're not going to see number 0 go up to the rafters, but if you're talking about a role guy, a complimentary guy who really just made his mark on a place over a long course of time, it was Bradley. And twofold, he kind of became that bridge between the Doc Rivers era and the Brad Stevens era, helping them just turn around as fast as they did in a year and a half. And then the fact that this guy just improved his game every year in some different way. And I still look at that last year he came in and rebounded 6 boards per game, over 6 boards per game when he was a 2 or 3 guy for his whole career, which just took everybody off guard. But the fact that he worked on that over the summer when no one really even expected that out of him just speaks to what he meant in Boston. He started his career as a guy who was just a ferocious defender, fell back in the draft, and Ainge kind of grabbed him late in that draft as a steal, one of the great steals to this day that he's made in the draft. And we've seen him become a deadly mid-range shooter. We've seen him step out to 3, even work on now dribble handoffs like you talked about in the opener. And now he's in Detroit, part of this core. And you seem to think he's an upgrade over Marcus Morris in that trade. I still think it's a lot of fun how fair both sides seem to see this deal and how it's going to play out over the year. But what kind of difference has Bradley made there from both a leadership perspective, some people have talked about, as well as on the court?
His defensive tenacity seems to have carried over to a lot of the Reggie Jackson and Ish Smith and Langston Galloway, especially. I think a lot of the guards are just a lot more active with their hands in passing lanes and when they're guarding on ball. It's probably not entirely fair to credit Avery Bradley with all of the active hands that you see.
Yeah, it's like Lonzo Ball on offense, right?
Yeah, exactly. I'd rather give Reggie Jackson credit for being healthy and stepping up his defense, and Ish Smith for just being a better defender this year. But it's also nice to have a guy like Avery Bradley who's just like tenacious and a dog on defense. He's taking over KCP's spot last year. I think KCP's reputation may have preceded him to some degree. He had a reputation of being a really good on-ball defender, and there were some disputes about that overall. Mm-hmm. But Avery Bradley is on both ends, I think, a pretty significant upgrade over KCP, and he's made a big difference simply by being a talent upgrade over a position that got a lot of minutes last season. You've also got a leadership thing. You can't go out there and be lazy on defense when Avery Bradley is diving to the floor and like breaking up everything in his quadrant of the floor. Mm-hmm. So I think that he's had an impact in the locker room. He's had impacts on both offense and defense. I do wish that he turned the ball over like half as much as he turns it over. It kind of drives me crazy. He's kind of a turnover machine, but he really kind of offsets that with the way he impacts things on both ends. Aside from that,
yeah, and we're still getting sentimental about it here. It was really cool to see him come back tonight and have that moment in Boston. They did the video tribute for him. And he was just a great, great solid player here. And you see it in Detroit now, right up there for number 1 defense in the league. Can't help but credit his overall impact on the game. I sort of compare it to having like a superstar offensive player. You go out there every night, you're going to expect them to put up 20, 30 points a game. Well, this guy, you can put him on one of those guys and just try to completely take him out of the game. I mean, I don't think he completely removed Kyrie Irving from the game tonight, but he did about as good of a job as you can to just throw him off. That play down the stretch where he was just running into the depth of the paint and probably should have been called for a travel. Bradley got called for the foul there, but that was just one of many times. He just throws guys off on the ball, 6 of 16. So Irving, probably one of the tougher guys to shut down in this league. Like, I really don't think one-on-one you can have someone completely shut him out of games just because of how dynamic he is on the ball. And I'd include Tony Allen and some of the great perimeter defenders in the league amongst that group who just, even if you put Klay Thompson too, we've seen in the finals, great perimeter defender who just could not hold this guy one-on-one. But Bradley, the one key we held to in Boston was that when they go against Cleveland, this guy's going to be able to just take him out of the game just enough. And that's the case with most guards across this league. Like, it is pretty crucial to have that one guy who can shut out. I mean, you've defeated Golden State at this point as a team, a lot of other great teams across the league at this point. Like, how important has Bradley's ability to just take a guy out of the game been to these big wins Detroit has had?
It's been really helpful. you're not going to shut down superstars. But if you can slow them down, make them a little bit less efficient, make their life a little bit more difficult, you're going to do better. And it's really nice. It's really beneficial to be able to have a guy who you can rely upon to do that. And Bradley has really been that guy for the Pistons so far.
How seriously should we take these guys among the up-and-coming best players in the league?
I have been trying to figure out what I think of their ceiling ever since probably about the 6 or 7 game mark. I don't really know. I think they're really good. Beyond that, I'm not entirely sure. I don't want to limit it and say I think they're a high 40s, low 50s win team. Maybe they're better. I don't know. That's a really high level. But at the same time, I kind of want to just sit back and see where this takes us because it's been a lot of fun so far, and I really don't know. I really don't know how good it can get at this point.
That answer right there just shows you how weird this is. They just came out of nowhere, and now you don't know what to expect out of this start.
Yeah, I consider myself to be probably one of the more optimistic Pistons people going into the season. And even I thought their most likely win total would be about 42 or so. I thought their ceiling was probably 44, 45. And most likely they'd finish right in that 42 win range. Now I don't think that would be acceptable at all with the start that they've gotten off to. It certainly looks as though I was pretty far off in my win target. It really makes me want to just hold off on prognosticating at this point for sure.
So last 2 questions I got, we'll circle right back to that trade that's going to joint these teams for the rest of the year and maybe even a playoff series if we get to that point between these two is possible. Missing Marcus Morris at all? And do you expect Bradley to be a long-term piece for this team, even if it does cost them maybe upwards of $20 million a year like that market might command?
Marcus Morris is a bit of a ball stopper. I think that this team needed to, at all costs, shed the long 20-foot twos, the kind of Carmelo Light approach that Marcus. I'm trying to be diplomatic about my approach here.
Of course,
Marcus Morris he does bring a lot to a team, but I don't necessarily think that what he brings is quite what this Pistons team needs right now. I think that it's a strange situation where a pretty good player in Marcus Morris, his removal was kind of an addition by subtraction kind of situation.
But you did bring an expiring contract on, so I know it's getting ahead of itself, but there is a contract now that Detroit has to address. I think that's the one thing you can say Boston did come away with pretty big in this trade is contract and money flexibility because I don't know how much do you think Detroit is willing to drop on Bradley? Because, like you said, there's already a few guys on the team who they've probably spent a few too many dollars on. You got a big contract in Drummond. Are they going to go upwards of $20 million to keep Bradley? You think?
I think they'll pay what it takes to keep him. I know he's going to be seeking north of that. I also know that the Tom Gores is basically I think he's kind of itching to have a team that he can go into the luxury tax for. Not that that's ever the goal necessarily, but I think that he's willing for a winner. This team did not win like they were hoping last year, so it made sense that they did what it took to stay out of the luxury tax. This year, if they go out and win 50 games and they make it to the second round of the playoffs, I have very little doubt that they're going to back up the truck. For Avery Bradley, if that's what it takes.
We know that term well around here.
Oh, yeah.
So there's Duncan Smith, and we're going to leave it there. Marcus Morris, still trying to figure him out. I mean...
Yeah, you will be trying to figure him out for some time.
Yeah, and luckily he just seems to be a crazy shot maker who is making those shots so far, so we'll take it to this point, but once that stops, we'll see where that goes.
He had one good month last season, and the rest of the season he was missing those shots. So for you guys, for the sake of you guys, I hope he keeps hitting them. But we know how those shots go.
Yeah, too many Marcuses taking crazy shots on this team. So we're going to talk about that on the other side of this show. Thanks for being with us for part of it, Duncan. It's good to get that outside knowledge. And where can the people follow you on Twitter?
Follow me on Twitter at Duncan Smith NBA.
There you go, Duncan Smith. That's our show for today, and we will see you next week. Good night, everybody.
Reunion Arena in Dallas, where the Mavs and Lakers are playing tonight, was built in 1980. Now, you couldn't ask for a better facility. It's easily accessible, has all the comforts of a theater, and there isn't a bad seat in the house. But for some reason, there are those who prefer the Boston Garden, mostly those who wear Celtic green.
What is so special about the Boston Garden other than the fact that it's 1,000 years old? Let's take a look.